So in this demo video, I'm following up the demonstration that showed you how to do a slightly more complex version of the perspective grid, more accurate as well. So that was the grid perspective method. And in this video, I'm going to go through now and show you building on top of your framework, because what you've built in terms of using the grid that you see on the floor and on the wall, and the points that we plotted, both a position off of center or in the grid somewhere, and then height up and then back and cutting it off. All of that process is building your basic geometry. But you don't draw directly on that because there's all of that complex mix of lines. Sometimes this is called the spider method because there's so many little lines that you've drawn in there back to your vanishing point. So what we're going to do in this video is look at, well, what's our next step after that to get closer to a finished drawing that we're going to present to a production team. So I'm going to start up our video here. And the first thing you'll see is that I have a little piece of paper. It's called onion skin paper, which is just tracing paper. And I'm going to put that over the top of the drawing that we did in the last presentation. And so you can see I'm getting the masking tape out, and I'm going to get a couple of pieces for that to attach. And what I'm going to do, you'll notice up here, is attach across the top. I've lined up both top edges of the paper, and then I'm tucking that tape back behind it. So I'm not taping to the table, I'm taping one sheet to the other sheet, but I'm doing it so that it's basically a hinge at the top. So there I go again, and I'm going to tuck it under back behind. So now I've got this nice tracing paper piece over the top of all of my geometry, which makes my set perspective correct. But I can lift it up like I did there anytime I need to look underneath and make sure I'm seeing the points correctly. You could also do this on a light table so that you're getting a light behind this, and it'll help everything show up through a little bit better. I'm not doing that here because it would be harder to film, and so I'm just going to get it to where we can see through it. So this tracing paper, or onion skin paper it's called sometimes just because of how thin it is, allows me to see that whole grid. You can see my 6-foot man, and I'm going to start here just drawing some things in that are easy. So I see where my tree was framed in. If you remember, we put that in there and kind of roughed in the drawing of a tree from my research and from my understanding of trees after I set it on the grid and drew it up and drew the crown, the kind of cylinder shape that goes up around. So we see that it's going up a little taller than our sidewalls, which are our proscenium height. And then I'm going to work in what I might want to see from my research, and this is going to help me decide as I design, how am I going to do this? Is this a flat cutout tree? Is this going to be a three-dimensional tree that I'm going to end up needing to build somehow with tubing and texturing to go over it, and what are the leaves going to be like? But this is obviously a tree with leaves on it. We're not in the fall, and so this would kind of set with what's appropriate for the play. Now we had drawn in where a fence went, and you see this looks correct. I'm deciding from my research it's a little picket fence. But you see the fence gets shorter as it goes back, and because we're below the horizon line, it's vanishing up ever so slightly toward that horizon line. So I've got those roughed in from my research, and so all the geometry is leading me here. I've got it mapped behind to make it look correct perspective-wise. And then I just have to think and research, how do I want this to look? So you see an arch on top of that particular entry to the yard. Finishing up a little the tree bottom where the roots run into there. I'm going to go back over here to the stump. Remember, it was a natural shape that we roughed in with an oval on the floor, and then we raised an oval up for the top of it. And looking at my research, I see how those roots go, and I rough those in. Now I'm going to put in some lines for the proscenium opening. So that's the front edge of the stage. That's the back line. I stopped where the set happens. Now I'm coming back in. I just made this rectangle for the bench. and a little square in the back for it to go to. So I'm going to start with that, but then I'll look at my research and say, what kind of park bench do I need? How thick is it here at the bottom? What are some details for the legs? Do they have little rounded feet? Do they have some shape to them? And I'm not worried about getting the perspective right now. I've already got that. I'm just going in and placing in the details, and it's going to look right. There's got a little curved top to it. And now that bench looks like it's sitting on the ground, and it's looking like it has some sort of specific detail that fits the play. So there I'm putting in some of the back to it. Looks like it's one of those metal kind of glider swings. That's a little bit older, probably a metal one. It's an outdoor one. So I'm going back now and drawing across the top. There wasn't a line there, but that's the height of the proscenium. So now I can put the proscenium back in. And that line at the back, which they're both the same height off the floor, but it looks lower because it's further away. It's shrinking down toward that horizon line. That's the cyc. That's our backdrop. So I've roughed those in without drawing over scenery that's already there. And now I'm working on the back fence. Remember, there was a fence that happens that kind of goes to the neighbor's yard or something, and I'm giving it different heights for my boards there, looking at my research and saying I want it to be a planked fence, but I'm not using a straight edge in this case because I want it to look a little older, a little bit kind of roughed in, a little more homey. And so you see different heights on those boards. It doesn't look all perfectly square and artificial. Now I'm coming back to the house, and that's where I'd figured out my back wall is. And that's where the porch hits the back wall. I've remember raised those up from my ground plan where I had points inside squares, and I raised up and cut them off. So I'm just looking at the red pencil back behind, and then I'm bringing in where it hits the floor. That's starting to look pretty good. Looks like that platform, which is a porch. So there's where my wall hits the wing of the theater. And then there's where my door went. Notice how those things are vanishing down ever so slightly toward the horizon line. That's what we found out when we elevated those points, and it all looks right for perspective. Doing some pencil sharpening here, so another reminder to keep things sharp. The fatter the pencil lead gets, the less your details are staying crisp, and you're getting kind of broad strokes. So here's my door. And what's it going to look like? It's look at research, and I've got a 2-panel door that seems like an older style. So there I've put my panels in. There's where the doorknob, I decided left or right. I want it to swing in and do that. So here I'm looking at my ground plan again, and what else do I have? Okay, windows. So I'm going to rough in my windows now. And some of this stuff you might all draw at the beginning, and some of it, if you've got enough of your framework in. See, I'm looking at the top of the door and saying those lines need to kind of follow what's happening in the door, which I did do carefully with my perspective method. So now those two windows sit in there pretty nicely. I've got a little frame to start going around them, a frame around the door, so I need to look at architectural details to make sure it's accurate looking. Then I'm going to say, well, how do those windows need to divide? And I'm going to do for these a 3/1, it's called. So when you've got the division of the different windows, this one's got 3 panes on the top and 1 on the bottom, which is again another older style, maybe the 30s and 40s. So anytime I need to check my drawing, I'm sliding a piece of white paper in between my original drawing and then my onion skin tracing paper drawing. And I can see it without all those confusing lines, and I can double check and see that looks good to me. So you see I've extended the left wall of the house there further, and the 2 windows sit up with it. Adds a little variety. It's not just all so symmetrical. Here come the steps, which I roughed in perspective-wise on the previous drawing. And so that's giving me my first step. You can barely see the step. And then we have the second step, and then the third one hits up on the porch. So it's starting to look like a nice backyard kind of feel. We got the tree and the archway and the fence. Now I'm adding other details in. If I've got it framed in, I can just kind of figure out where I want some things. So I've got a line going in right there. Here's another one over on the other side. which can be either edge boards or they can be a drain pipe that's going down. These two, if you see, are becoming kind of a little front porch in terms of posts. So I've come up from my downstage corners and I've started to create what will look kind of like a overhang, a little awning or an extension of the roof. And I didn't do this with perspective in terms of the previous drawing, and I could have, but I'm playing with it and getting what I think looks right. Notice how that's vanishing down that line, so I'm using my understanding of perspective and how that needs to look. And I'm looking at it several times and say, do I like this line? Do I like that line? And then I'm looking at it to see if that feels good. Notice my posts are way out on the far edges of my porch because design-wise, if I put them sometimes where they would be in real life, they'd be in front of the door. They'd create a lot of issues sightline-wise, so we might have to cheat a little. I'm adding a second story because I think that's going to look a little more natural. So I just went a line straight up. I'm putting the windows above the others. I'm extending that kind of overhang, or it's actually the roof going up from that far corner. There's the kind of corner molding where the paneling will hit. And so I might have research showing me those things, and I'm going to go back and look at it now. And that upper window looks good. Both of the lines are vanishing down that are horizontals. And so it's feeling like it's perspective-wise in the correct world. Go back and add some more details. So I'm putting my piece of paper in. If I've gotten to the place where I'm not copying directly from things I did before, I can put in my white paper, and now I'm adding some other branches, some bark texture. What's the ground going to be like? And there's some roughing in of some earth feel. And then this is a little path, and my path is going to run from my gate or my archway over past the stump into the front steps. So this is like coming from the street, and you come through a little winding path up to the house. On the deck, on the porch, there needs to be a thickness to the porch, both the overhang and then the framing. And now I'm going back and putting in the piers. If it's pier and beam house, those are the little piers of brick or stone that things sit on. And then here's some lattice work underneath, which would allow ventilation under the house, so it's staying dry, but it keeps animals and things from getting up underneath there. See that in a lot of older homes. Adding in some shrubberies on the side. I didn't have to perspective draw those, but now I've got a sense of where everything sits. There's some shrubbery in the back corner, front corner. Putting in a little detail on the front porch there. Looks like a jug, a milk jug or something. Then I'm putting in some shingles on the roof up there. And those are following my other perspective lines, keeping those angles that are happening so that feels like we've got a roof on there. In the back, I'm putting in a little bit of just shrubbery or grass that might be beyond there. That would probably be a ground row built in the theater. Here's some clouds. So I'm thinking design-wise as I do all of this, both lighting and scenery. Maybe that's a painted backdrop. Maybe that's a gobo. Here we have a sense of another house that's, in the neighborhood, and I'm just perspective drawing that in, roughed based on knowing where the rest of the set is working already. So see how that chimney vanishes down a little bit, the roofs vanish down. That could be a backdrop, again, of that house, or it could be something we build back there as a little structural piece that's painted to look like a piece far away. Here comes the planking on the house, decided on wood planking. Here we're getting the door cleaned back up a little bit. I'm going to fill in the windows a little bit. If we're outside in the day, then most windows look pretty dark. And so this is starting to be some either blinds or shades that are in there, or just the fact that we can't really see into the house very clearly. a little bit more molding that would be appropriate for the house, and some planking that's on there. So that's all things you'd be going back and looking at your research to make sure looked proper to you. And now we have a drawing that we can add color to. We can start thinking about light and shadow to finish out some of that. Sharpening up my pencil again to add some more finishing touches. So here's another tree that's back behind if we need something that kind of closes in the backyard a little bit more. That could be a built small tree, a cutout or something behind it. And taking that out again to kind of look and see if there's anything else. What I want to do here is put a figure in. So you remember a 6-foot figure, that's my man over on the side. I can put a dot anywhere I want and draw it up to my horizon line since it's at 6 feet. And a person in that place will be properly scaled at 6 feet. And I chose the archway because I can draw that person in and it won't block any of my scenery that I want the production team to see. But it'll be really nice to have this scale figure, this character in. So I'm roughing in some blocks from knowing my figure drawing. I got a little head, and I've got 2 different torso blocks, and then your legs are half of the height of your body. And this is a female figure, which means shoulders are usually a little narrower than hips when you start out with your first framing. So I did that. And then I'm going to finish in and put in, it's a little more, looks like a period play, 30s, 40s, and so I'm going to put her in a dress and add a little bit of hair there. I don't need a whole lot of details, but just enough to make it really look like it's a person standing there. And immediately I can imagine her sitting in that bench, climbing up on that porch, and doing all the different things that are needed in the set. And we don't have to kind of just pretend that the set is there, but we're not thinking of the action. We always want to be thinking of the actor and the action and have the director see that. So that's a drawing that finishes up from our earlier perspective grid that gives us an even more accurate grid than our first perspective sketch method. And then we've gone back with our onion skin paper and created this. When we get through here, we could easily take this onion skin paper to a copier and copy it onto watercolor paper, which will go through most copiers, and have it on there. Or we could use different transfer methods to put it onto a colored paper or a gray board, an illustration board or something to finish putting color pencil or watercolors on.